Julian, welcome to the show. Good afternoon to you.
Hi, Michael. Thanks for having me on.
Not a problem. First, the story in the New Zealand Herald this morning. Your reaction to it?
Well, I read it, and my answer to that would be is that Chris McCabe is a great guy, and I have people all over the country that just pop their hands up and say, we want to help with this because we believe in what you're doing, and they gather around and they, I give them jobs to do and tell them, what they can do to help, and they help. And I am not hiring people for money, or I'm not hiring people for a diplomatic position in some sort of, like a US consul or somewhere where there's a high degree of security needed to do background checks on everybody. And I didn't even know this about Chris. He was just a guy we've got hundreds of people all over the country who are involved in this. And I honestly, I had no idea that he was involved in this. And, he's a great guy. And so he helped do the job, and he did a really good job. He was a very good organiser, and he was a great guy, and there was nothing dodgy about him in any way whatsoever, and he was there to help.
If you'd known, would it have made any difference anyhow?
I'd probably ask him a few questions. What was, what is that organisation that you belong to, and what were you, what was that all about? And if it was something which I thought was going to not be helpful, probably wouldn't have, said, Chris, maybe not for you. But it would have to be pretty extreme because we've had all kinds of people involved, Maori, Chinese, just about every ethnicity involved in helping to organise all this. So I don't do background checks on people, and I don't need to, and really that's the way it is.
Listen, I suggested that was pretty much not only the answer you'd give, but also understandable too, because to say I organised the New Zealand First election campaign in 1996, people put their hand up to help. You don't immediately say, I need to do a background and a police check of you before you do, because you need them on the ground, don't you? You
need them on the ground, and you haven't got time to muck around.
That's exactly right. You don't have the time. Yeah.
No.
All right, now that you do know that you've probably read the whole story yourself, he joined the National Front in New Zealand in 2016. He's come up with a few of these thoughts as well. Your views as to whether or not his views are yours, or do you go and whether or not you'll continue to use them in Hawke's Bay or not?
Oh, I would still continue to use Chris, no problem, because he's not a racist. He believes that I had a chat with him this morning over the phone about it, and I said to him, have you read what they've written about you? And some of it was twisted and contorted and not accurate. And he's not a racist. He's not a white supremacist. He's not a Nazi. He's a guy that actually believes in equality, which is why he's helping me. So I couldn't see anything about, and some of the comments that were sort of, skewed by you get David Fisher onto something, and it's always going to be given a really bad spin.
Agreed. Yep.
And
he's a very bad journalist.
He's a really bad journalist because he's twisting things, and he's kind of making this subtle association with Chris McCabe and Nazis, and with Brendan Tarrant, the guy who shot up, all the Muslims down in Christchurch. And kind of reading between the lines, you could get from what he wrote that Chris McCabe is saying it could have been done in a more professional way. Well, that's nothing like what Chris was saying and would say and has ever said. So David Fisher is just, he's obviously trying to paint a picture here and then associate me with it. They're trying everything. The racist thing didn't stick. So now it's white supremacists, and now it's, I'm associating with Nazis and all this kind of thing. So anyway, we just yawn and keep going.
Okay, all right. Now, can I just ask, we had somebody who disparaged you just prior to putting you on the show this morning. He says that one of the stories that you're telling to do with co-governance is that New Zealand was settled by Celtic forebears before Maori arrived in New Zealand. Have you been saying that in your co-governance meetings?
No, but I agree.
You agree with what?
No, I haven't been saying that, but I do agree that there's plenty of evidence around the place. I'd love to give more time to investigate that, but there's some pretty big historians who are saying there's almost no doubt that Maori are not Indigenous, that people were here before Maori, for example, Moriori, and then some ginger-haired white kind of people who were here, and even Maori who've talked about those people when they came here and found them here. There's stories about how Maori have, encountered these other people groups that were here when they arrived, and so on. But it needs, to be fair, Michael, I need to do more investigation into that, but I know I'm going on the back of some reputable historians in New Zealand, like Bruce Moon, that they are saying that there's compelling evidence that there were people here before Maori, well and truly.
Yeah. Okay. Actually, Bruce isn't a historian. You know that he's a physicist, but he writes history.
Yes, but I know, but so is John Robinson, sort of a physicist as well. And these guys aren't full-time historians, but they're still very capable people who've dedicated their lives to studying history. And I'm not a quote historian, but I'm a great reader. I love it, and I'm reporting on New Zealand's history. So you don't need to be a historian to be, and by the way, what do you mean by it? When people say, "Oh, you're not a historian," it means you haven't done a PhD in some historical subject or whatever. There's a lot of people who are really good at history in New Zealand who have no quote PhD in any kind of history qualification, but you don't need that to be a good historian.
No, but it's just you use the words reputable historian, and he's not actually a trained historian, and I don't know that he has a reputation.
Well, maybe I should okay, well, maybe I should say that by reputable I mean that he's produced books that a lot of people have bought and would acclaim him as being somebody who can write about history in a very clever way.
All right.
Anyway.
All right, no, that's fine. Now, supporters and guns, that's the other way in which you are being discredited at the moment. You mentioned, and I think I saw you directly quoted, Julian, in which you said that some people are so upset, something along those lines, if I might paraphrase, that they are actually buying guns because they perceive there to be sort of threat future. Yeah? That's roughly what you said, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's what I said, and that's exactly what's happening.
Right.
People are arming up, and privately they're not going out advertising it, but privately they are. What I'd love to do is find out what the gun sales are like in New Zealand at the moment.
Sorry, they're arming up for what purpose?
They're arming up thinking that they're going to need guns for what's coming and for some sort of a conflict that's likely, that they feel that there's something brewing in New Zealand. A civil war, that's what I was thinking. There's some kind of civil war brewing, and it's not outside the realms of possibility, so they are getting a gun. That's what they've told me, people, at least once a week.
Okay. So these are people saying that to you. Do you personally believe that?
Well, I didn't used to. I don't own a gun. I didn't used to believe that, but I'm thinking now that with the number of people who are talking about it, I think far out, maybe I'm missing something, and that it is definitely a possibility. I certainly wouldn't be involved. I do not own a gun, but I can't control what goes on in the rest of New Zealand and what the rest of New Zealanders are thinking.
No, I accept that, but I mean, every follower, I've been in government, central and local, for long enough to know that every party, every movement has deluded people who follow them irrespective. Do you think possibly these people are deluded as well?
Well, some of the people who have spoken to me strike me as being very stable, intelligent.
All crazy people come across that way, though, Julian, to start with. I mean, they don't generally have eyes rolling in their back in their sockets and, dressed in loincloths. I mean, isn't it that nature of the beast that when you meet somebody for the first time, you go, oh, you assume they're sane, and then they start talking?
No, these are people who look sane, and when they're talking, sound sane to me, and they're not all agitated or anything. They're just saying calmly, we don't know what's coming, but we want to be ready for anything that does come if it eventuates, sort of thing. And so they're not. I'm not too bad on discernment, I think, but I think that people seem to be getting ready for whatever.
That would seem to be sort of out of the prepper sort of doomsday cult following in the United States, wouldn't it, though? That sort of thinking that there's going to be some sort of massive civil disobedience, civil war, and that for some reason you need to get in a whole stack of toilet paper and arm yourself with the 22. Well,
I'm not one of those people, but, famous theologian said you can't stop the birds flying over your head, but you can stop them nesting in your hair. I've had people give me these thoughts. That's the give me these ideas. Give me what they're doing. That's the birds flying over your head. But I don't have them let those thoughts nest in my head and start going out and buying a gun of toilet paper, because I don't think we're ready for that yet. I don't think we're anywhere near that. But some people do think that. That's what's happening.
Okay, all right. No, that's fine. You've clarified that. That's good. Moving on. Now, the other thing that's happening, obviously, is that the further and further this tour progresses, the more and more public agencies and people in control of venues and private ones are denying you the opportunity to use those venues for promoting your message. Is that what do you think drives that? Disagreement with what you're saying, or fear at what the protesters might do?
No, it's definitely, good question. It's definitely driven by the media, who want to give an impression of our meetings that they're dangerous, that you shouldn't go. There's going to be police. There's going to be protesters, and it's a highly volatile environment. And so I think the media is definitely pushing this because they don't want people to hear the message that I've got, that I'm giving. There's the tremendous fear coming through the media, but also there's evidence of things to be fearful of. I mean, there were people who were coming into our Palmerston North event and leaving it who were being kicked and punched. I'm talking about people over 70 who are being kicked and punched and having their cell phones knocked out of their hands. I think one lady was going to be on your show today. She might have been with Sean early today, I don't know. But there's been quite a level of violence at these meetings from the protesters. Somebody in Hastings lurched at my laptop in the middle of a meeting, hoisted it above her head and chucked it onto a concrete floor. And then went on a rampage like a bull elephant inside the meeting. We've got footage of that. Have you seen it?
No, but listen, from what I've seen, I think the protesters have behaved in a completely irresponsible way. I think the woman that ended up getting chucked out of your Palmerston North meeting because she brought a whistle clearly needed to be removed from the meeting. She brought that action upon herself.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's true. And she also did damage to the eardrum of the 80-year-old in front of her. The media didn't pick up on that. In fact, I think she had to go to a specialist the next day to get it all sorted.
Oh, no, the woman's name is Victoria Jacobs, and she's a nutter.
Okay.
And widely regarded as a sort of leftist activist on just about any sort of cause that you want. So, yeah, no, it's all right. Now, also in the meeting, the New Zealand Herald report, quote, Batchelor's meetings across the country have presented racist tropes and factually incorrect claims about co-governance. How do you respond to that? Because there's the New Zealand Herald, David Fisher, writing that about you personally in the Herald this morning.
Well, I always say, because this is a familiar line, I always say, give us an example.
Yes.
And you always get silent.
Yep.
There's no examples. I'm a white supremacist. Give us an example of something I've said that led you to that conclusion. He's giving facts. He's giving misinformation. Well, give me an example. They never answer because there is nothing. You know that booklet we put out? As I said before, we've printed 350,000 of those. The little booklet's gone all over the country. Now you think, man, they would target that. There's going to be something. Nobody's targeted. Nobody's mentioned anything about that book. Anything in it. You think that would be a prime target for the media to tear it apart, and nothing. Silence.
No, it's a fair point you've just raised on that one, because as you say, it's gone throughout a large number of homes in this country. I think the only action, though, is taken by the Electoral Commission, so you've had a complaint to them. You got a letter about that last week, did you?
Yep.
And
do you want me to...
Well, no, I had the man from the Electoral Commission. Oh, no, I had Graham Edgeler on last week, who is a lawyer.
I heard that. That was a very good interview. In fact, I passed it on to my lawyer.
Yeah.
That was a great interview. I like that.
Right. So the basic argument of Graham Edgeler, who was a lawyer skilled in the electoral law area, was that it'd be stretching it to suggest that your publication would run afoul of voter registration or trying to influence the election for a particular party this year.
Yep, that's right.
Do you accept that? Do you? I mean, the part that they tried of that of the pamphlet or the booklet you've put out, Julian, was the bit where they said, or the pamphlet says, allegedly. I'm sorry, I haven't read the bit, so I can't quote it directly. Something along the lines of, for actions to take, and one of the actions is don't vote for people who support co-governance. Now, the booklet does say that, yes?
Yes, it does. Yep, definitely.
Okay. Is it? I think it was both individuals and parties, and that's where the Electoral Commission say, "Oh, you've strayed into the political arena." Do you accept that that's fair criticism from them?
Well, that booklet was never a political advertisement. It was, pushing some sort of political party, because I'm not a political party. We don't ever push any political party in any of our meetings. We never have. We're just giving information to the public so they can vote intelligently. So they can say, hey, we do need to look at every party's, and I don't single out any party in my brochure at all. I say look at the policy statements of all the parties and don't vote for a party which is going to be for co-governance. And really, it's up to the voters to take that advice or discard it. So no, I don't accept what the Commission's saying. I don't think it's a pushing any particular party. It's definitely not. I mean, they said in their letter, oh, you're putting people off the voting for the Maori Party and the Labour Party. And I went, absolutely. I didn't say that in the booklet, but I'm hoping that's going to happen.
One of the things, though, that came out of that was that you could, and Graham Edgeler's comment said, you could just simply register with the Electoral Commission and basically carry on irrespective, as many other groups like Fish and Bird, Greenpeace, Taxpayers Union have. Are you thinking you might go down that track?
Well, what I've got to do, Michael, is I have to wait for my lawyer to get an official response from the Electoral Commission, because he's written to them with his response, and so we're just going to be guided by what they say. And if they say, yeah, you've got to do A, B, or C, or whatever, we'll just do it so we can comply.
Yeah.
As long as it's reasonable, and it's fair, and then we'll comply and keep moving.
Okay, all right. So as far as you're concerned, this is a minor hiccup in the road, but I guess what you were intrigued by was that you got a complaint in the first place.
Yeah, we thought they're moving in. We got a human rights complaint as well from the Human Rights Commission saying that we're breaching the Human Rights Commission now because we're saying things that are in breach of that, and they haven't told us what. So we've got to write back to them and say, can you be specific to let us know how we breached it? Haven't got an answer to that yet.
Really? So you've got a letter from the Human Rights Commission?
Yeah.
Written personally to you, Julian?
Yeah, written personally to me.
Alleging
that we've breached the Human Rights Bill, the Bill of Rights, and that
the Bill of Rights,
we've breached the Human Rights Commission, whatever that means, and I'm going back to them to say this has only just happened. I'm going back to them to say, can you be specific and tell us what it is and how we've breached so that we know what the misdemeanor.
Oh, I guess they're talking about the Human Rights Act, 1993, because that's the only one that would give them the authority to say that.
Yeah.
Would that be right?
So, yeah, that'd be right. So we know we're over the target. We must be getting close to the target here because, man, it's all coming out of the woodwork. I mean, Waititi and Debbie Naroa-Packer were in Parliament the other day quizzing the Prime Minister saying, what are we going to do about the Stop Co-Governance Tour and extreme right-wing views, white supremacist views, they actually said, coming through the tour. And the Prime Minister actually was quite good. He said, well, you have to put up with unpopular views you don't agree with, in the name of free speech. And the protesters have a right to protest, but also the organisers of the tour have a right to speak. And even if you don't agree with him, and he was actually quite good. I felt quite balanced. But Waititi and Debbie Naroa-Packer, man, they were like, no way, we got to shut this down.
All right. Yes, my apology. I don't know what happened there, but my microphone is now back. Julian, yeah, but they're rabbit, aren't they? And you were the red rag to a bull, to Pāti Māori.
Yeah, well, they're the biggest racists on the planet. They get away with saying all kinds of things that are absolutely racist and that are insulting to non-Maori, but nobody worries about it.
I agree with you. I agree with you 100% on that one. I think I know what the breach of. Listen, they'll write back to you and tell you this is. They'll say you've breached Section 61 of the Human Rights Act of 1993, which is that you have published, distributed written material which is threatening, abusive, or insulting, or broadcast by means of radio, television, or other public communication words which are threatening, abusive, or insulting, being matters or words likely to excite hostility against or bring into contempt any group of persons in or who may be coming to New Zealand on the grounds of colour, race, or ethnic or national origins of that group of persons. So I imagine that's the one they'll go after.
Okay.
But they haven't told you that you're in breach of Section 61. They've just made a general complaint.
Yeah, just a general complaint. So I guess Section 61 is going to be coming. But when you come into my meetings, they're as peaceful as little lambs. It's only the activists who are the violent ones. And so my meetings are actually, and people come away thanking us for putting the meeting on, and they're very, very grateful. So I don't know. I mean, is people getting upset about what you're saying necessarily a bad thing? Because heck, imagine a society where everybody agreed and everybody agreed on everything all the time. It's just unrealistic and it's unhealthy.
There's also, the thing that interests me is, has any of the mainstream media, from the New Zealand Herald to Stuff to TV1 to TV3, actually sat down with you and said, Julian, what are you saying? In exactly the same way I'm asking you now, and given you the opportunity to essentially paraphrase or at least summarise the nature of your lectures?
Okay, can I give that to you now in one sentence?
Sure.
We are calling all New Zealand back to the treaty in Maori, Te Tiriti, and the original meaning of that treaty. So we're actually the only group in this country currently that is seeking to do that, because the Waitangi Tribunal is using fraudulent versions of the treaty as the basis of their payouts, compensation, and we are saying they shouldn't do that. They're breaking international law, and international law stipulates that they must use the treaty of the indigenous people, which is Maori.
Yes,
and that treaty is a beautiful treaty. And if we could get back to it, the original meaning of it, we'd have a beautiful country. So that's what I'm trying to honour. But the activists are all outside the meeting, Michael, going, oh, honour the treaty, honour the treaty. They have no idea what they're talking about or what I'm talking about.
Right, just to explain to people, because it's not it is widely known that there's an English version of the treaty and there's a Maori version of the treaty. We all grew up, and I'm talking about my generation and probably the one that came after me as well, with very much the English version of the treaty premier in our thoughts and in our interpretation. And we all understood what Articles 1, 2 and 3 meant, and there was a general agreement on that. Then there was a legal case in which I think the Court of Appeals said, Julian, no, if you're going to interpret the Treaty of Waitangi, and they used the United Nations in actual fact to justify that, you use the indigenous interpretation, or the interpretation of the people who are in the lesser authority, in this particular case the Maori people. You use their version of the treaty as the proper way in which to interpret what it means. So they're suddenly, as you say, the Maori version of Te Tiriti became the accepted interpretation of it, which says something slightly different. Now
it's not just... Sorry.
Yeah, carry on. Now, you're saying, as I understand it, yes, I'm prepared to deal with that, but the modern interpretation of Te Tiriti is not the one that was originally used by whom?
The original treaty that was translated by Henry Williams and his son, Edward, on the night of the 4th of February, 1840, that was the one signed by 45 chiefs of Waitangi, that is the bona fide Treaty of Waitangi. And if you want to know what that treaty says in Maori, you just read the Littlewood draft, which was the final English draft, which was handed by Hobson to the Williams, father and son, to translate into Maori. Now, there's only two differences between the final English draft and the treaty in Maori, Te Tiriti, which is the one that was signed at Waitangi by the chiefs. And that is the date. The date of the final English draft is the 4th of February, and that's when it was finalised, so we accept that. And the date of the treaty in Maori is the 6th, which is right, because that's the date it was signed by the chiefs, so everything's in order there. And the only other difference is that last minute, Henry Williams, Hobson, Clendon, and the other treaty writers, Busby, they inserted the word Maori into Article 3 of the treaty in Maori last minute because they wanted to emphasise. Article 3 says the people of New Zealand shall be granted British citizenship. So they put the Maori people of New Zealand shall be granted British citizenship and be given all the rights of British citizens. Now, the reason they did that was so that they wanted to make it abundantly clear that it was the Maori who were going to get British citizenship through the treaty. And also the reasoning behind that was that the British who were here already had British citizenship, so there was no need to have them in there. So they said, let's make it real clear, because Maori were after British citizenship. They wanted the protection from each other to stop warring and stop stealing and plundering and murder and slavery and everything, and they wanted protection from the French. So the treaty writers inserted that word, Maori, into Article 3 in the treaty in Maori. Now, those are the only two differences. In other words, the final English draft and Te Tiriti are a mirror image in every respect, apart from those two differences that I've made. And the final English draft is in my book. I put it in my book so people can read it. And if you can read the Littlewood final English draft, you can fully understand Maori, the treaty in Maori. It's beautiful.
Okay, but can I ask this question of you? The Littlewood, and for those of you who would not be immediately au fait with the Littlewood Treaty, and that would be most people of a certain age because it's a relatively recent. It was a draft that was found, as I understand, in 1989 in the possession of the Littlewood family when they were cleaning out, as I understand, some furniture. And they found a copy of this translation, which, as you say, and from what I understand, I don't think there's any disagreement, was the instruction with the Williams brothers, I think it was, as to how to translate the treaty for the persons who were, or the Maori people who were going to sign it. Now, they didn't sign the Littlewood draft, they signed the treaty that was placed in front of them, yes?
Well, you have something not quite right there, Mike, if you don't mind me correcting
No,
that.
go for your life.
It's not the final English draft is not a treaty, it's a draft. And so it was the final English draft that was presented to the Williams at 4 o'clock on the 4th of February to be translated into Maori. And so it's the final English draft. Now, you never sign off a draft because it's a draft.
Yeah, but can I also say to you, does it matter? At the end of the day, when the Treaty of Waitangi Act was made legislation in 1975, 14 years before the discovery of the Littlewood draft, it outlined what the Maori version of the treaty was and also the English version of the treaty too. And they are in legislation made so in 1975 in the Treaty of Waitangi Act. So does it really matter that there was a draft earlier or from the Littlewood or anything, given that the legislation was made in 1975?
It makes a huge difference because that final English draft is not being used and it's definitely the final English draft because the Littlewood text mirrors the Maori language text in every respect, particularly with sequence of statements, the word weight, per sentence and the use of synonyms in both language. And, whatever scientific criteria one wishes to apply, the Littlewood draft meets the expected profile of the final English draft. And so what the Waitangi Tribunal is using is two things: Hugh Carpery's fraudulent 1989 back translation of the treaty. That's the first thing they're using. And the second thing they're using is a rogue James Freeman English version of the treaty.
Why do you say that Hugh Carpery's Maori translation, which is widely accepted as being the Maori translation of the treaty, is fraudulent?
Because he says in that his back translation that Maori didn't cede sovereignty. He changes three things. He changes kawanatanga, which is the Maori word for sovereignty. He says Maori chiefs didn't know what that was. Well, that's nonsense. Didn't know what that meant. That's absolute nonsense, because for two reasons. One is that we have the speeches of the chiefs in the tent at Waitangi on the 5th and 6th of February, and those chiefs clearly, through what they did in their speeches, all the speeches were recorded by Colenso, and we have them. And those chiefs who said, we don't want your treaty, and there were a few of them, Te Hugh and others, they said that in their speeches that they were clear that they understood sovereignty and they didn't want it. They didn't want to come under a governor or the Queen and to give up sovereignty. And the second evidence we have, very strong evidence, is that the Ko-Marama Conference in 1860, 112 chiefs met for a month. Many of those chiefs had been at Waitangi, and in the notes of that conference, they passed a series of resolutions. And the first resolution in which they accepted unanimously, this is 112 chiefs at the Ko-Marama Conference, 1860, affirmed that all of those chiefs ceded sovereignty on February the 6th, 1840. But the most compelling evidence, so there's two huge pieces of evidence, just facts, that would prove Hugh Carpery to be wrong when he says Maori didn't know what the word meant, because they reaffirmed it again at Ko-Marama.
No, it's not entirely. It's not. I think he's saying two things, though. I mean, even I can get that one. In 1840, by 1860, they had 20 years of the treaty. You've got to remember, it was also declared a legal nullity before, around about that time as well, too, wasn't it? And it had pretty much fallen into abeyance between 1840 and 1860, as you know, Julian. But by 1860, they would have had a pretty clear idea about what the treaty meant from their point of view. In 1840, it's entirely possible they didn't. What do you think?
In 1860, they all affirmed, those 112 chiefs affirmed unanimously at that conference that they had ceded sovereignty.
Okay. But they have ceded sovereignty. I mean, that is widely accepted. That's why the New Zealand Parliament makes legislation in this country. And really, co-governance, as you rightly say, is designed to empower Maori for this partnership concept. That it wasn't the Treaty of Waitangi Tribunal; it was the Court of Appeal brought into our public purview, wasn't it? The late 1980s, when they made judgments around Coal Corp and state-owned enterprises and what the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi meant. Yeah.
No, incorrect. Let's just go back to sovereignty.
Well, no, it's not incorrect, Julian. The Treaty of...
Well, Justice Cook, who you're talking about,
yeah,
Justice Cook made a decision when he said that the treaty was akin to a partnership. He did not say it was a partnership, and nor was it a partnership. But the leap has been taken by activists that it is a partnership, and it's not. And there's absolutely nothing in the treaty. They didn't need to have an activist judge come on and tell the New Zealand what the treaty actually meant, because it's very self-explanatory.
But if I can take you back, Julian, I understand what you're saying. And Cook never said it was 50-50, by the way, at all. In fact, he made them, and nobody assumed at the time that he had either. He was talking about you have a say. He didn't mean to say that you have the majority say or even a 50-50 split. You're right, that's an interpretation of the 21st century and by local government officials. By central government officials. But if I can take you back, though, Julian, the problem surely stems from the fact that parliaments successively have never defined what the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi are. Yeah?
Well, there's no such thing as principles in the treaty.
No. But
So how
they,
can you
no,
define something?
wait on. Because that's what's in the law, Julian. So in all the law, which goes back to the State-Owned Enterprises Act of 1986 and the Coal Corp Acts and the Local Government Act, it doesn't matter. All the law that was consequent of that time, that's written with the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi in it, right up front, we've never defined what those principles are, have we?
Of course, because that means you can make them say whatever you want, and that's how the activists have got so far with fraud and corruption, because you can get away with anything if you can't define it.
But do you think? But we left it to the courts to define it, didn't we?
No, they're not defined. The Waitangi Tribunal is the sole arbiter of what those principles are, and they can move and change like the wind. They're so vague. Those principles are so vague, and we know what the treaty teaches. The treaty actually teaches equality, democracy, one vote, one person, all votes equal value, and it's very clear. So the principles were introduced by Geoffrey Palmer and others, as my book outlines.
That's right.
But really, they were trying to make something vague and nondescript to give a huge opening for activists to say the treaty means whatever they want it to mean.
Mike Moore told me that when he and others in the cabinet questioned Geoffrey Palmer as to what the principles of Treaty of Waitangi meant, because it had gone into the SOE legislation and various other legislation of the time, Geoffrey Palmer said to them, "Don't worry about it, it's just words." So Moore has publicly said, Mike Moore, the former Labour Prime Minister, that they didn't think that having the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi would actually become actionable. They were horrified when they later on discovered that it was going to be.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's what happened.
Well, yes. And it was Geoffrey Palmer who did it, I think, it was the Treaty of Waitangi State Enterprises in 1987. Well, it was December 1987 it was introduced. Okay, listen, you and I could sit there and chat about this forever. The important point is that you have the opportunity to be able to speak and to be able to relay a message. How is the rest of the tour going to go from your point of view?
Oh, well, I'm expecting it to go perfectly, fantastically. I'm expecting the amount of impact we're having to keep on increasing, because I'm not changing anything. We're just going to keep going, because last night we had a live stream and we've had 7,000 people view that. Now that's phenomenal, because in our meetings we're getting between 50 and 300 at the most, or actually 600 in Christchurch, but nothing like 6,000. So we're going to start live streaming. So the activists have actually pushed us into a massive success formula, because we couldn't find anywhere to meet in New Plymouth. There's nowhere that we could have a public meeting. Everywhere we went, iwi closed us down through pressure, through threats, through death threats and all that sort of stuff, burn your building down threats. So we were forced to go into a private home and do a live feed with through Facebook, and we got a massive response from that, from people all over the country. And it seems like there's a lot of people who want to hear this seminar but are too afraid to come. So they've just pushed us into a strategy that's going to be massively successful for us.
Are you still intending to have public meetings throughout the country, Julian?
If I can get into a building, yeah, because there are some older people, post-50s, not you, Michael.
Oh, no, yeah, I know, who prefer to go to a public meeting and don't have access to, the modern technology. Yeah,
they can't access computers, some of the older people, so we do want to keep them going just for them.
Yeah.
People who don't have they're not tech savvy.
So how long are you expecting the tour to last from your point of view? Have you got a finishing point, or is it just keep on going?
No, we're going to keep rolling well after the elections, because people have asked us to, until we get rid of co-governance, because it's illegal and it's wrong.
Okay.
So we're going to keep lobbying political parties and do whatever we need to do to restore the treaty in Maori to its original meaning and keep going.
Do you have an agenda, sort of like there's the 10 bullet points that we belong, sort of like not like a Nicene Creed, but something that is your sort of political action points?
The only action point we have is that we want government, that means all political parties, because it's going to be a coalition, obviously, to expunge is the right word, E-X-P-U-N-G-E, expunge co-governance from all legislation.
So that's, and let me get this right, you have no intention of removing the Treaty of Waitangi or of denying its validity?
No, nothing like that. We want to actually restore it to its original meaning and to honour it.
I have to say, that does not strike me as being particularly racist in intent, Julian.
No, it's not, but this is how it's being spun by the activists, by the media. They're doing everything they can to shut this down.
Mm. Yes.
And you have to ask, why? Why would they do this? They know. In fact, I hold up a banner in our meeting, which was left by activists on the road in Tauranga. It's huge. It's about 3 metres long and 2 metres high. It's a massive big banner. It says, Honour Te Tiriti. And at the end of my meetings, I hold it up and I say, there you go. What have I just done? Mm. After 3 hours of talking, I say, what have I just done? And the crowd says, you've honoured Te Tiriti. Mm. And we get a clap from the crowd.
Well, I don't like the idea that you have your views truncated, misinterpreted. I think the best way to understand what you're saying is to listen to you and to go and have a presentation. The Facebook conversation that you had, Julian, are you intending to repeat that? Do you go on, is there a Stop Co-Governance Facebook site or something, is there?
Yeah, there is. But all my conferences, or not all of them, but a lot of them are on our website anyway, stopcogovernance.kiwi. And so if you go on there, there's a good one with Nobby Clark, the Mayor of...
Yep, know the one. Mate, I've got to go. It's 1 o'clock. I want to carry on this conversation, Julian, at some time in the very near future. I thank you very much for joining us over the last wee while and for the opportunity to discuss this in a dispassionate way. That is Julian Batchelor, the co-founder of the Stop Co-Governance Tour. I'm sorry I've got to go at 1, but we will continue this conversation. But at least you've had the opportunity of hearing directly from Julian what the story is about and whether or not, and making up your own minds. I mean, not everything that you'll agree with. It doesn't matter, you don't need to. The question is, should he be allowed to talk? Should he be allowed to promote his views? Should he be allowed to at least debate, discuss, disseminate information that runs contrary to the orthodoxy? And I don't think there's any question as to what the answer to that question should be.